I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint.
Well, thank you very much, Lizzie. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Frank, at the Cleveland Woodley Park Village. And thank you all, for coming. Just a couple of words, I would appreciate it if you would hold questions until the end of the more formal presentation. There'll be time, to answer questions, at that point. If you want, if the questions come to mind and you want to record, your questions, so you don't forget, and we put it in the chat box, and then we'll address that, towards the end. Well, there will be time. Okay, good. Let's without any further ado, why don't we start? Okay, Lizzie, you want to go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay. What we're going to talk, this slide basically gives you the agenda, for the 3 sessions. Tonight, basically, what we're going to be talking about is the first 3 items. We're going to talk about what is Alzheimer's, what does it do, what effects does it have. We're going to talk about its prevalence, who has it, what is the prognosis, for the future. And we're going to talk about risks, both those that you can modify, and thankfully there are things that you can modify. There are things that you can reduce the risks of Alzheimer's and other dementias. There are some risk factors that you cannot modify, and we'll get into that later. Next week's session, just for preview, we'll talk about warning signs of the disease. Warning signs appear long before there is actually dementia. It is a progressive disease. It starts out basically with no symptoms at all and progresses, from there, to a form of a mild cognitive impairment to a more severe cognitive impairment or dementia. And we'll talk about that, the warning signs of that, and why paying attention to the warning signs before it progresses to a point of dementia is important. We'll talk about diagnosis of the disease, and we'll talk about some of the developments which have made diagnosis easier. And it looks like very, very soon you'll be able to diagnose the disease, in a primary primary medical provider facility. Okay, and we'll talk about, what kinds of treatments are available. And the third session, we'll begin to look ahead and talk about research, and there's a lot of it going on. And we'll talk about, what, can be anticipated, in the next few years. And we'll talk about support for people at risk, for people who have the disease, and for people, who are providing care services, for those, with the disease. Okay, why don't we go on to the next slide? Okay, there are a number of slides here, some of which are basically, I'm going to go through relatively quickly because they basically are descriptions of what is to come. I want to differentiate, some people think about Alzheimer's and they think about dementia, and they use the 2 terms as though they were synonyms. They're not synonyms. Dementia, as indicated here, is an umbrella term for loss of memory and other thinking abilities severe enough to interfere with daily life. Dementia is not a form of aging. Alzheimer's is one of the causes of dementia. And as we'll say in a moment, it is certainly the most common, but certainly not the only one. Some others are Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal, I'll get this, yeah, frontotemporal dementia, Huntington's disease, Parkinson's disease, and there's also, what we sometimes refer to as mixed dementias, where people have, the markers for more than one type of the dementia. And I would mention, in that context, I mentioned that Alzheimer's is the most common cause, the most common form of dementia. Typically, 60 to 80% of dementia diagnoses are diagnoses of Alzheimer's. It is not, however, uncommon that there are other dementias, at the same time, which we sometimes refer to as mixed dementias or mixed pathology. I mentioned also that it is progressive. It starts out, Alzheimer's is, it starts out as asymptomatic. Probably some of the changes in the brain begin as much as 20 years before any symptoms begin to appear. Then you start getting some mild forms of cognitive decline. We use them MCI or mild cognitive impairment, where there are some changes, but they have not reached the level, of dementia. They do not interfere they do not really interfere very much with daily life. We'll talk a little bit about, that. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, if we will. And this again is basically a summary of what I just said. Dementia is a general term for a collection of symptoms that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. Alzheimer is the most common cause, but not the only one. It is not a normal part of aging. It is a progressive brain disease, which destroys brain cells, causes memory changes, erratic behavior, loss of body functions. It is slowly, painfully takes away a person's identity, ability to connect with others, think, walk, and talk, and it is ultimately a fatal disease. Okay, some statistics. First of all, it's common. Over 7 million people in this country, it's the latest figures I've seen are estimated at 7.4 million, are living with Alzheimer's disease at one stage or another. 1 out of 3 adults dies with Alzheimer's or another dementia. While the treatment for heart disease and some other serious diseases over the last quarter century as such, our means of treating them have improved. So we have declines. In this case, it shows declines over the last quarter century in deaths from heart disease by a couple of percent. At the same time, deaths from Alzheimer's disease much more than doubled in the same period of time. And some of the reasons for that we'll get into later. 7.4 million people or so are living with Alzheimer's disease in this country. It says nearly 12 million people are providing support. Actually, it's now a little over 12 million. So it is a disease, which obviously affects a lot of people. There are some other things here, a couple things I did want to point out. The statistic here, lifetime risk for Alzheimer's at age 45. 1 in 5 for women, 1 in 10 for men. We'll talk about why there is a difference. And the difference is quite astounding. This last one on the right, I've included, I think it's kind of interesting in a way. 92% of Americans would want a medication to slow the progression of Alzheimer's following a diagnosis. Well, the question I would immediately ask is, why isn't it 100%? We'll get into that, but I think this may be a bit misleading because there are factors involved in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease that may lead people who have a diagnosis of the disease to decide they don't want to go that route. Okay, but the bottom, the takeaway here is basically it's very common. A lot of people have it. A lot of people are caring for it. And in strictly economic terms, it's costing a bundle. And that's, both out of pocket for the individuals involved and their carekeepers, as well as society as well. Okay, let's go on. What is it? This again is a recapitulation. It's a disease that destroys nerve cells, resulting in problems of memory and language, progressive over years, from unnoticeable at the outset to mild to severe, impairing functioning, and is ultimately fatal. It is a cause or a type of dementia. It is the most common one. The 7.4 million people with Alzheimer's disease. The next most common dementia is Lewy body, and that's about 1 million. So you can see that Alzheimer's is far and away the most common form, but it's certainly not the only form. There are no preventions, at least with current technology, current knowledge. There are some, and we'll get into this a little later, some risk factors are modifiable. There are things that you can do to reduce your risk. There are no cures. There are, however, treatments that slow progression and others that treat the symptoms and improve the quality of life of those living with the disease. Okay, let's go on. Okay, again, recapitulation. This is posed as a question, but we've already answered it. The answer is more than 7 million. Let's go on to the next slide, which provides the answers. There's okay. Let's go on. Similarly, this is posed as a question. How many people provide unpaid care for people living with Alzheimer's? About 12 million. It's actually a little over 12 million now. It's hard to keep the publications quite up to date because the numbers are increasing. Okay, Alzheimer's is a normal part of aging. No, it is not. It certainly affects when you get to a point where there are symptoms, mild cognitive impairment or dementia. And there are different stages of dementia, which we'll talk about as well. But it affects people who are fairly old, 65 and older, and the prevalence of the disease increases substantially, such that at 85 years old, probably at least a third of the population is living with Alzheimer's, whether or not it has been formally diagnosed. Can people under the age of 65 get Alzheimer's? The answer is yes. That is true. It is, however, much less common. It's what we refer to as early onset Alzheimer's. Where that happens, it is almost always the case that there's a very strong family history there. It occurs in, large groups. Just as a personal aside, um, my my son is adopted. He's from a part of Colombia, around the city of Medellin, the departamento or province or state of Antioquia. There's a recent book written, about a family, a very extended family. We're talking about thousands in that area where the prevalence of early onset Alzheimer's is very, very high. And there's a lot of work going on to figure out why and what that means, for treatment, both of early onset Alzheimer's as well as the more typical later age. Okay, let's talk about the risk factors. Go on to the next slide, if you will. What are the greatest known factors for Alzheimer's disease? Three of them are listed here. And I'll tell you, I'll give you the answer, in a minute, but I will say two things. First of all of these are risk factors: genetics, family history, age. The other thing I'll say about it is none of these risk factors are controllable. We haven't figured out how to make people younger than they are. No one has discovered the fountain of youth. Our family is our family, whether we like it or not, where that's what we have. Our genetics are our genetics. These are all risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. The most important, the greatest known one is age. Going on to the next factor. It is not a house. Let's not go back. Let's go back. Okay. Yes, that one. It is not a normal aging, but is the greatest risk factor for the disease. After age 65, the risk of Alzheimer's doubles every 5 years. 34% of people 85 and older have Alzheimer's disease, whether or not diagnosed. Now, as just to reiterate, no, it is not normal to aging. 34% or 1/3 is a huge number, but also recognize that it means 66% of 85-year-old people do not have the disease. It is not a normal factor of aging. Okay, let's go on. All right. Again, to reiterate, age is the greatest risk factor. Individual risk for developing increases at age 65. Family history is a known risk factor. Having a parent or sibling with the disease increases an individual's risk. And you can be tested for that. You can be tested for certain genes, that you inherit, that either increase your risk if you have it or don't if you don't have it. Other important but non-modifiable disease factors: gender. As I indicated before, prospects for women are much greater. Of the 7.4 million or so Americans currently thought to have Alzheimer's disease, close to 2/3 are women. We'll talk about why. Some of it relates to the fact that on average, women live longer than men. that does not fully account for a fairly wide difference in the occurrence of the disease. Risk is important. As an indicator, Black Americans have about twice the risk of white Americans of the same age, and other factors. Gender, we just talked about that. Women, much more than men. Hispanic white Americans, about 50% greater risk than white non-Hispanic Americans. And we'll talk about these risk factors a little later. Okay, let's go. Thankfully, there are things that you can do about your risk. There's no guarantees that you can prevent the disease, but there are lots of things you can do. And the other good news about this is the things that you could do to reduce your risk, you probably already know about. You've probably been told, in context of what you can do about your health, your physical health more generally. These things will, I think, be fairly familiar to you. Don't smoke. Exercise. Challenge your mind. Control your blood pressure. Hypertension is a risk factor. Manage diabetes, type 2 diabetes in particular. Diabetes is a significant risk factor. Sleep. 7 hours is a good number. And sleep soundly. Stay in school. This is obviously very critical to challenge your mind. It's again the use it or lose it phenomenon. What you eat, we'll talk about that in a moment as well. And if you need to lose weight, lose weight. Okay, going on. All right, we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. Control your blood pressure. Hypertension is a risk factor and a significant one. Manage diabetes. Type 2 diabetes can be prevented or treated through healthier eating, increased physical activity, and, if necessary, medication. Going on. Get moving. What you do depends on what you like doing. Walking is fine. Dancing is fine. Gardening is fine. The point is the relationship between your heart rate and increase the blood flow to the brain and to the body. What you eat, more veggies, lean meats, foods that are less processed, lower in fat, berries, nuts are very good for you. Sometimes the MIND diet is recommended. But the important thing, I think, is more veggies, green veggies, leaner meats, and such. Okay, going on. Healthy weight. Keep your weight down through physical activity, through what you eat, maintain a healthy weight, and get your sleep. And there's some clues here, some things about how to make sure you actually are getting your sleep. It's not easy. Okay, moving along to the next. Stop smoking. Protect your head is almost intuitive. This is a brain disease we're talking about. Knocking your head around is not a good idea. I don't think an awful lot can be said about that. There's a lot of publicity recently to professional football players developing various forms of dementia at a later age. That's not surprising. Okay, next. Stay in school, challenge your mind. These are basically similar things. This is the use it or lose it. Learn something new. Take classes. Learn a new language. Learn a new skill. Try something that you haven't done before. These are benefits to your brain, and they do reduce your risk. Okay. Here's one. I'd say I have hearing loss. Okay. I've been always, when and for a while, I did public presentations such as this one on hearing loss. And there's a lot of work done by the researchers in the hearing loss community. Johns Hopkins University is very prominent among them, about the increased risks of cognitive decline associated with hearing loss, even mild hearing loss. And the more severe the hearing loss, the greater the risk of developing cognitive decline and dementia. That is not to say that one causes the other. That is to say they're related to each other in some way. There may be a cause and effect there, or it may be that the two are have a common cause. But you cannot say that hearing loss causes dementia or that dementia relates in hearing loss. But they are very closely related. And the other thing about, there are certain other features that are common. Hearing loss, the most common forms of hearing loss, one, they cannot be corrected. Two, they're progressive. Three, they increase in prevalence and severity with age. All of these things apply also to Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. And yes, they are related. Okay, let's go on. I had mentioned, okay, we talked about all the modifiable risks. What this is designed to show you is the degree to which you can modify your risk. As indicated here, the Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention, Intervention, and so forth identified 14 modifiable risk factors, most of which we've identified already mentioned. And they might prevent as much as nearly half of the cases of dementia worldwide. In the United States, a study which I'll describe in the next two slides, but don't go there yet, involved a big study, 375,000 people. These are people, without dementia, without cognitive decline, but are at risk. They are at an age when they have that risk factor. And they discuss, what was designed to show is if you could put these people on a regimen which reduces their risk factors, you can reduce the dementia cases. In this case, it was shown in this by 37%. Let's go on, and I'll describe it's the US Pointer study. And if you want more information about it, here, the Alzheimer's Association was a sponsor. And going on their website, you can find lots of information about it. But basically, lifestyle interventions which targeting a combination of physical activity, nutrition, cognitive and social challenges shown to reduce risk of older adults at risk for cognitive declines, reduce risk factors by about 37%. Okay, the next slide. This one basically describes the Pointer study a little more. The regimen for the two groups basically had the same regimen. Physical exercise, 30 to 35 minutes on to severe to intense aerobic activity 4 times a week, plus strength and flexibility exercises twice a week. Cognitive exercises. There were some computer-based brain training programs, 3 times a week, 30 minutes each, plus regular engagement in other intellectually and stimulating and challenging and social activities. Health monitoring for the group, for the 375,000, regular checkups on blood pressure, weight, and lab tests. Nutrition, diet was prescribed, adherence to the MIND diet, emphasizing dark green, leafy green vegetables, nuts, whole grains, olive oil and fats, and fish, excuse me, and limited sugar and unhealthy fats. The difference between the two groups, both of them got the same regimen. The difference is one of them was self-directed and the other one was followed. You might say the other one was nagged regularly. And basically what the study showed was both groups did better than the general population. But the group that got nagged, the group that got, well, they didn't use a nasty term like a structured lifestyle program. Okay, that's the difference in structure, as I say, was one, and accountability and support provided. I use the term nags, better term to use, I suppose. But that's the group that did the best. And again, basically what we're saying is, yes, you can reduce your risk. You cannot reduce your risk to the point where there is no risk, but you can significantly reduce their risk. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Well, let me just do this one more. Worldwide Fingers is basically a follow-on because there's a lot of work going on in a lot of different countries designed to show what can be done, in terms of lifestyle to reduce risk. And with different kinds of different environments. And if you want more information about it, www.alz.org. That's the Alzheimer's Association website /WW Fingers, I don't know, it's an acronym. The F is for Finland, where apparently was originated, the study was originated, and it may be, and I believe headquartered, but it is worldwide. There's a lot of work, a lot of very interesting work going on along this. Okay, I'm going to stop here. And I'm going to throw it open, for questions. We have some time.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Questions,
Yeah.
thoughts, comments. Doesn't just have to be a question. It could be a takeaway, a thought.
Okay. Well, if you want some takeaways, one, Alzheimer's is prevalent. It's increasing. It affects people, particularly at age 65 and above, women more than men, but guys, you are not protected. White people more than black people, are better protected, but you're certainly not fully protected. You can be white, you can be male, You can have average weight. You can eat pretty well. You can exercise. That is not a guarantee of anything.
Russell,
You can be a family which has no experience, with dementia. That is not a full guarantee. It does reduce your risk. Yes.
um, we know by going online what the United States is doing or where the science is leading in terms of slowing down, retarding Alzheimer's. But I wonder if other countries are more aggressive and gone further.
I don't know. Um, I would guess we'll get into this a little more next week. A couple of things are happening, which I suspect is going to increase um, therapeutic treatments for Alzheimer's. The main ones, there are ways now of diagnosing the disease earlier on, much less expensively and less intrusively. So I suspect you're going to get diagnoses much earlier, and it's going to lead, to greater prevalence, greater use, of the disease. Um, are you? Let me ask you a question. When you say other countries are more aggressive, are you thinking of the kinds of interventions which slow the disease? Are you also including kinds of interventions, which don't necessarily slow the disease but treat its symptoms? So it's increase and improve the quality of life for people with the disease while they released for some period of time. Are you
Elements
including
of
both?
both.
Yeah. I don't know that it is more aggressive in other countries than here. Maybe it is, but to be perfectly honest, I don't know.
Just wondered what Finland was doing.
Um, well, I mean, beyond being involved, and essentially, I think hosting, the Fingers program, which, as I say, is a worldwide program designed, to tell for various types of audiences, various types of people in various backgrounds. What is the effect, of changing your lifestyle in a fashion, which reduces the disease? How much? Finland, as I say, has, been prominent in developing, this worldwide study, the so-called worldwide finger study. Um, Beyond that, I don't know.
Thank you.
I did add the Fingers website into the chat if you're interested in looking more into that. And I just wanted to remind everybody that we did pre-mute you when you came on. So please unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question or have a comment. Otherwise, we won't be able to hear you. And it did get me, Ken, you got me thinking about like different countries, like healthcare systems and medical systems that are around and how they, tackle different problems with public health policies too. So definitely inspired me to do some more research. Carla, you came off mute. Go ahead, Carla.
Sorry.
Oh, I thought maybe you were going to ask a question because you came off of mute.
Yeah, actually I was, and I
Oh,
was,
great.
yeah. Um, so years and decades ago, my father died of what we all thought was Alzheimer's, and it turned out to be vascular dementia. Because my mom, they were both doctors, and my mom had an autopsy done of his brain. And so I'm just wondering maybe if you could talk a little bit about the difference between the two, and whether what you said in terms of causes and outcomes, um, and whether what you said, all the things you've said about Alzheimer's so far, the risk factors, etc., would apply to vascular dementia?
Most of what I said is applicable to dementias across the range. The causes and the markers for Alzheimer's disease is different, for some of the others. The issue, what you were talking about, the misdiagnosis is common. And actually the form of dementia that is very often mistaken for Alzheimer's is Lewy body. The symptoms are very similar. The markers in the brain, and in the case of Alzheimer's, the markers actually can be traced with modern technology. I'm not sure that is the case with Lewy body, but it is thought to be it's a different protein in the brain which causes Lewy body. But the symptoms are very similar, and the diagnosis is very similar. Approximately 60 to 80% of people of all dementias are Alzheimer's. Why is there a range of 20? And that's basically because of the difficulty in diagnosis. Diagnosis of Alzheimer's is becoming easier. It's becoming less complicated. It's becoming less intrusive, invasive. The FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, just within the last year, has approved certain blood tests. And a primary care doctor's facility, which will show which will indicate whether the brain has the biomarkers, the proteins which cause, which are the biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease, and whether it has them in sufficient quantity. The tests they may, for diagnosis purposes, the blood tests are quite new for people, who show up as very likely positive. They may want to do other tests to confirm that diagnosis because the tests are new and some of them are not yet shown to be foolproof, shall we say. And there are ways to do that. Spinal taps, PET scans. Being PET scans, I think, are preferable, is basically because it's not an unpleasant. It's expensive, but it's at least not unpleasant. But misdiagnosis is not uncommon because the symptoms are fairly common. There is lately something, I don't know if you read, if you follow, something that's called late. It's called late for two reasons. First of all, it seems to show up in people even later stage than Alzheimer's. And that's one reason. The other reason why it's called late is because the brain change is an accumulation of DDP43 protein. And DDP is limbic, predominant, age-related encephalopathy, DDP43. Very similar in terms of its symptoms to Alzheimer's, except it generally occurs at a somewhat later stage and seems to be seems to be related to a different protein, in the brain. Yes, I think until the very recent definition of late dementia, I think most people now recognize with late were probably diagnosed with Alzheimer's because it's very similar. What else can I tell you?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I would rather, I mean, first of all, it doesn't seem to me that it's so great to get diagnosed if there's nothing they can do about it. And I would rather they spend time doing something about it than, you know, coming up with 16 ways to diagnose it and then tell you, oh, we're so sorry. Well, you're going to lose your mind, but we're so sorry. There's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Until not too long ago, that was exactly right. As we'll talk a little bit more about this, in next week. The disease was first described 120 years ago by Dr. Alzheimer. His name is he lives on. I'm not sure I would want it. In 1906, the first treatment of any sort for Alzheimer's disease occurred 90 years later and was a treatment for symptoms. They could reduce the symptoms of people. It does not elongate the process of the disease. It certainly doesn't cure it. Several other medications in between the introduction of that in 1996 and 2020 produced the first approved drug to slow the progression of the disease. And we'll talk about this in greater detail next week. So until 2020, you were right. Or I'll put it this way, until 1996, with the introduction of the first drug that at least could treat symptoms, there wasn't much you could do about it. What's the difference if you could diagnose it early? I mean, so what? Good luck. But that's no longer the case. There, you can make life better for people with the disease. And recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, there are drugs that have been introduced to slow the progression of the disease. Yes, so there are things you can do. Yes. And the other point is, and I'll get into this again next week, the disease, particularly the medications for slowing the disease, are most effective if introduced at an early stage, before dementia. And that's why an early diagnosis becomes important.
Janet, I know you wanted to jump in. Go.
Yeah. How is treatment or management different depending on the specificity of the diagnosis? That is, whether it's Alzheimer's or whether it's Lewy body or whether it's vascular dementia, is it treated and managed in different ways?
Yeah. In the case of Alzheimer's, the treatment recently introduced in the last, there were 3 drugs that were introduced and approved. One was then withdrawn. There are 2 that are on the market now, which are FDA approved. One is called Kisunla, and the other one is Leqembi. They both are basically, what they do is to reduce one of the markers, beta amyloid, in the brain, which is a biomarker, a hallmark of the disease. And by reducing the accumulation in the brain, they can slow the progression of the disease. These would not be effective treatments for any of the other dementias because beta amyloid is not a biomarker for the others. Late dementia, the protein in the brain which causes it, if you will, is TDP-43. I don't know that there is any treatment yet for TDP-43. There had, because of the fact that because of it, and actually, it was only really identified in the last year or two. And before that, it was generally assumed to be Alzheimer's. But now that we know that it's different, we also know that the symptoms are the same or similar. The progression is similar, although with late it's usually a little slower. But the anti-amyloid drugs, to reduce the amyloid is not likely to have any effect because it's not the amyloid, which is the hallmark of late. And that's, that's the problem, with some of the other dementias as well. My suspicion is, and I have to confess here, I know more about Alzheimer's than I know about some of the other dementias. I know something about Lewy body because a good friend of mine had it and passed away about 6 months ago or so. But I know much more about Alzheimer's. But my impression is with some of the others, you can treat symptoms. I don't think that there are cures for any. And I don't think there's very much yet done, although there's lots of research done about at least slowing the disease progression.
Mm-hmm.
We will, in the last session, talk about looking at, and we'll talk about, there's a lot of research going on. Some of this is going to help. It's going to make early diagnosis easier. It's going to make the identification of the biomarkers for some of the other dementias clearer and how you treat them better. And eventually, I hope, it will result in preventions and a cure. But we're not there yet. There are items, I think, in the chat box. I want to make sure that
Most of them were me putting some just resources in as you were talking. So I added the WW Fingers Alzheimer's Association website that you can click on and save for yourself. I also added an article about the late version of dementia that Russ was speaking about. And then I just made a comment to Anne's point, which I think was really important, that there is a lot of reasons why people might not seek a diagnosis because of that kind of knowing that maybe there's limited treatment or not a cure. But of course, the social worker in me wants to encourage the and Stan knows the early diagnosis or early kind of detection, because there is a lot of management that can be done both medically and from like more of a social model around quality of life, planning ahead, thinking about future preferences, having agency in decisions now versus later. And then, of course, we know in our healthcare system, diagnoses help people access treatment. So I put an example of a Medicare program, the GUIDE program, that is an acronym that is important to look into. And it's a new thing in terms of, providing care navigation support around folks living with dementia and their care partners. So something to take a look at as well. But yeah, it's tricky, I think. And you probably vocalize something that a lot of people probably in this space feel is true for themselves too, of like what can be the point, but it's complex, and there are some things that we can do. And the
Yeah.
village is a great example of that, of how we can be inclusive of folks living with dementia, at different stages in our community.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk. There are things that, as you point out, they're non-medical lifestyle interventions, and they're primarily the ones that I already talked about to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. They're usually recommended as well, for people who have the disease. They live better. They don't necessarily live longer. It does not slow the progression of the disease, but they live better. And there's similar types of interventions. And as I say, one of the good news is you've all heard about it, because it's everyone, everybody, it's involved, in healthcare. They talk about, control your blood pressure, eat the right stuff, and avoid the wrong stuff. Exercise, and exercise your mind. Move. Control your diabetes if you have it. Control your weight. Yeah, these are all things that are, not only, they obviously have been shown to significantly reduce the risk of the disease. They also can be, they don't, for people who have a diagnosis, they don't slow the disease, but you're going to be better off, at least for a while.
Great. I
Looks
just want to
like
let folks know that I put the registration link in for next week's session. We had about 10 people signed up for next week. We had 28 this week, so I know that not everyone signed up for each of the sessions. So it's there for your convenience if you'd like to join us next week at the same time on Wednesday at 7.
Yeah, I hope you will. Basically, we did this in 3 sessions, basically because to get a good look at Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's in particular, trying to do it in a single session, is just too much. We haven't yet got into talking about the treatments. We haven't gotten into, the various stages. And I've given you sort of a hint, why it's, talking about, why diagnosis early, why paying attention, to the warning signs before they reach the stage of dementia is important. Is largely, because there are things that can be done at that stage. And, looking ahead, there's a lot of research going on, and I suspect in the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot of improvements. Certainly it is the case. Look, as I say, the first FDA approved treatment to slow the disease occurred in 2020, 6 years ago. There are now 2 on the market. There are several, in a research phase. I think we're going to see much more improvement, a lot of improvement. And it's going to depend upon, I think, continue to depend upon an early diagnosis.
We are just, oh, I'm sorry, Marge. We'll take one from Marge and then we'll wrap up.
Question I didn't understand previously. Are we automatically signed up for next week, or do we have to do that separately whenever the next session is?
You need to register separately. for that one. Marge, I can write your name down and make sure to register you for the next two if you would like.
Yeah, I'm not aware. I didn't know.
That's okay. I'll make sure. I'll make a note and I'll register you.
Okay,
Anyone
thank
else?
you.
Would anyone else like that?
I just registered for myself on your link.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I did too.
Great.
And my CHV folks can definitely reach out to me too if you're having any challenges with registering. So have no fear. We'll get you there. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Russ, for
Thank
being
you.
a host for us this evening, and lending your time 3 times this month to share about Alzheimer's and other dementias. So excited to be back here next week, hopefully with all of you if you're able to make it, and more. So spread the word to your community. We'd love to have more people. It's important that everybody that needs the information gets the information.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody. Take good care.
All right. Bye-bye.